everybody. This is Dr. Lori Shemek.
And I'm Omar Cumberbatch. You're listening to This Podcast Burns Fat. Hey, Lori, how are you today?
Hi, Omar. Doing wonderful. How is everything with you?
I'm doing great as well. Everything is good. I'm getting ready for the holidays. I can't believe it's going to
Yeah.
be 2025 in 2 weeks.
Can you believe it? I
No,
know.
not at all. Not at all.
I'm like in holiday mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, like 2 months ago, I started getting ready for the holidays.
Well, good for you because Thanksgiving was so late. It just like
I know.
it just messed me
Exactly.
all up. So, but I just want to
Yeah.
wish the audience wonderful holiday season, Happy New Year, and just thank you for the support throughout these years.
Yeah.
Fantastic, and we really appreciate you.
We really do. And thank you so much. And, and remember, it's the holidays, so don't beat up on yourself
That's
if
it.
if things go astray.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have an
Yeah.
awesome guest to wrap up the year. His name is Dr. John Lewis. And yeah, I think, as far as like just being a person who, once you hear this episode, you're gonna realize like the true pioneers of things go through it tough, right? Like they put their
Yeah.
neck out, they do a lot for their beliefs. And I really like to just give him some kudos for that. So I really thought he was wonderful.
Yeah, it is a journey, isn't it? And a lot of sacrifice for a lot of people.
Yeah,
So we applaud him for sure. Dr.
absolutely.
John Lewis.
Yes. Let's jump into it.
Okay.
Hey, Dr. Lewis, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Hi, Dr. Lewis. Thank you so
Hi.
much for being here. We really appreciate it. Finally got you here.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
Lori.
Lori's way of making me publicly apologize for all the miscommunications and
Bend over. Oh,
No worries.
yeah. But
No
if you could
worries.
just give our listeners a little bit about your background and why you are so interested in the science part of nutrition and nutrition, obviously.
I would be happy to. It's been a long road, actually. I started out as a little guy in the backyard with my grandfather. Poor guy, and despite the fact that he had severe rheumatoid arthritis, pitched baseball to me when I was 3, 4 years old, and that put me on a path of basically playing anything with a ball other than soccer. And later in life, after I got into college, I no longer playing sports in high school, and I started getting into drug-free competitive bodybuilding. And that's where I kind of took a new path in terms of not just doing physical activity or engaging in it for just to be with my friends and have a good time, but to actually do something that had a very definable goal. And that was a competition that required me to be very precise about training and diet and whatnot. And I realized after a couple of years of doing that, number one, I wasn't willing to take drugs. I just wasn't willing to go down that road and take all those risks. But number two, maybe is just as importantly, I realized I was never going to make a living. I mean, there's only one Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I don't know if the average person knows anybody besides Arnold and maybe Lou Ferrigno. I mean, those are about the only two people that ever really achieved any level of, what I would call like great success. So,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't really appeal to me to continue down that. And I didn't really plan on getting into research either, quite frankly. I mean, I wasn't one of these people that knew from a very young age what I wanted to do in life. I sort of went through my education and my training I call myself a bit of a chameleon, like depending on the people I was with at the time and what some of their interests were, that helped to shape and mold me. But ultimately, as I stopped competing in bodybuilding, and I still train that way, it's just that I don't step on a stage anymore in my bikini suit. But but I shifted into more of a focus on health as opposed to physical and or sports performance. So
That was a smart decision.
well, I just think, I mean, if you're genetically blessed enough to be able to play a sport and make a living at it, that's wonderful. And I've worked with a few of those folks, but it's just such a small segment of all of the rest of us who can't play a sport and make a living. And so and even in fact, even for those people, I mean, I would argue now, looking back on bodybuilding, that getting all the way down to 3.5% fat is not exactly healthy. I mean,
No.
that's a
Yeah.
significant stressor in and of itself.
Right.
So, health obviously should be our number one focus, but as you guys know, dealing mostly with people with weight issues, we clearly don't have an emphasis on health in our country. And so, as I was going through my training and really deciding I wanted to go down the road of nutrition and dietary supplementation and exercise science research, I managed to meet a couple of people along the way who introduced me to the concept of how polysaccharides could be utilized for health in many different ways. And so again, I've kind of been on this sort of long and winding road, as the Beatles once said, and I'm still on the long and winding road. I'm nowhere near where I hope to eventually get to, but it's just been a lot of, I would say, little steps along the way of my own personal evolution and journey. And I met these two people about 20 years ago, Dr. Rach McDaniel and Barbara Kimley, who again shared with me their stories about polysaccharides, and it just completely changed my life. And so it led to me running some clinical trials at the University of Miami Medical School. And then I spent about 20 years in academics doing all of that. And then after about 20 years of that, I realized I wasn't going to do that the rest of my life and my career. I got pretty burned out on the whole grant writing, grant
Oh,
getting
it is.
process.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
horrible way to
brutal.
make a living, quite frankly.
It's brutal. Yeah.
It's not really the best way to live.
Mm-mm.
And in fact, in somebody in my case of doing nutrition at a very nutrition research at a very conservative, conventional oriented place like the University of Miami Medical School, I mean, literally, I was one of just a handful of people doing that kind of research. Everybody else is either in pharma or genetics or, some sort of other behavioral thing that is okay. But there was no real institutional or systemic emphasis placed on nutrition, exercise prevention. We don't have at the University of Miami, we don't have any type of center or department of nutrition. It's a small private institution. So, to its credit, it can't have a center or department on everything. But there were just a lot of instances where I realized, institutionally speaking, it wasn't the best fit in terms of what I was doing. And then when we made some very significant discoveries in our Alzheimer's research, and I literally was on cloud nine. I mean, I felt like I was, doing something that was going to take me, really just to incredible places, or so I thought at that time. This is about a decade ago. And so I submitted a couple of applications to NIH. I submitted a couple of applications to the Alzheimer's Association showing, excuse me, these bureaucrats, these data we'd published in our first paper in 2013, and how, we had something really exciting for the sixth leading killer of Americans that has forget treatment. No one can even come to any scientific consensus on what causes it. And we showed some really remarkable things I'll talk about in just a moment, but I got nothing. I literally got no response from these 4 attempts to these 2 different places. And so I went from, being on cloud nine on top of the mountain to, I wasn't even in the valley. I was like below the valley.
Yeah.
I was, you name it, angered, sad, frustrated, disappointed, disillusioned, the whole 9 yards. You hear these, so-called talking heads out there proclaiming they have an interest in nutrition, but they give it what I feel like is just sort of a veiled attempt at trying to appease maybe people like myself or even you guys, people in this wellness realm. But the reality is that they're only interested in something that they can license with either big pharma or a biotech company and, attempt to profit with millions or billions of dollars. And I don't care what they say, and nobody can convince me otherwise because I lived it. I don't need anybody else's opinion on that topic. I lived it, and I experienced the raw emotion of how it feels to go from making really significant discoveries to then just being completely ignored because it didn't have anything to do with a drug or gene therapy or something very biotechnical. It was the basis of our existence besides oxygen and water is nutrition. And so when you get rejected after you've made some really significant discovery, to me, I don't need, I mean, that's all the proof in the
Yeah, I've heard this, what you're saying multiple times
pudding.
from
Yeah.
many people.
No, it definitely. We've heard it from a number of our guests as well. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
make two quick points because I want to thank you for going down the nutrition lane and keeping it in the forefront, and it's really important. And I'm glad that you have stuck with it. I'm sorry, I hear the frustration in your voice, and
Yes.
I also want to just commend you for keeping going on with this instead of just just saying, okay, you know what, I'm just going to take that path and
Yeah,
follow
exactly.
the road. And also,
Thank you.
I just want to give you an opportunity to kind of, yeah, like dive into a little bit of what you found. I know the nutrition component is incredibly important, and obviously me and Lori, we believe in it wholeheartedly. Yeah, just tell us what, just tell us everything. Yeah,
Maybe
that's
start
what.
out with what is a polysaccharide?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, Omar. That's very kind of you to say. I mean, I never even considered going to the so-called dark side, if you will. I actually had a company here in town that was involved in branding and marketing for drug companies, for naming and whatnot. And they actually offered me a job at one point, and I had no interest in it. I didn't have any interest, didn't have any desire to be involved in promoting drugs in any fashion or any way. So you have to, I mean, unless you're just a sellout, maybe everybody has his or her number, but I don't view myself that way. And I don't do what I do to make, billions of dollars either. I wouldn't have spent 20 years in academics in the trenches, working 80 hours a week, running clinical trials, managing pennies and dimes and nickels. If I was trying to become wealthy, that's not the way to do it. I was very stupid if that was my goal to become wealthy. I was a very dumb person doing it. But a polysaccharide, for those of you who are listening to the show and don't know, that's a complex sugar. And of course, we've been so led to believe by the media for, I don't know, a half a century at least, maybe longer, that sugar is bad for us. You hear the word sugar and you immediately associate bad with it. At least we Americans do. I don't know about other people from other countries, but it really bothers me when I hear that blanket term or that blanket phrase said, because as a scientist, as an author, as somebody who is very particular about the language, I think it's an ignorant statement when you just lump everything in together, like, as they say, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because of two very important characteristics of all sugars. One is their source, and two is their biochemical complexity. So I think we can all agree a monosaccharide, a simple sugar like high fructose corn syrup, is probably something you want to totally avoid, if not at least reduce and not eat too much of. That's pretty well established. It'll spike your insulin, your glucose, and cause you to have all sorts of metabolic complications and problems. And then you have a disaccharide like table sugar or white sucrose, which again is probably not the thing that you want to eat too much of on any regular basis. And then finally, you have polysaccharides that are very complex, so dynamic compounds. They're strung together. All these glucose units are strung together by these very just strong covalent glycosidic bonds, and they are coated with so much information that it's like they can't even be drawn on a piece of paper. They're literally like 5D images. It's so difficult to even graphically characterize these things. And the ones that my colleagues and I have studied for now nearly 20 years are the ones from aloe vera and rice bran. And so, again, I just want our listeners to sum all of that up, to remember that if you say all sugar is bad for you, number one, you're wrong. And number two, it's coming from a place of ignorance. And I don't blame people for not knowing. It's just, kind of parroting or repeating phrases that you hear people say, but you really you're not being truthful and you're not being factual when you make that statement. So these complex sugars are very beneficial for us. And in our clinical trials in things like Alzheimer's disease that I just mentioned, multiple sclerosis, HIV, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, another study in people with no disease, healthy people, we showed time and time again how just incredibly beneficial these polysaccharides for all sorts of different health outcomes. So for example, in the Alzheimer's study that I mentioned, we put people on this polysaccharide-based formula that included both of these polysaccharides, the aloe vera, the rice bran, and a few other nutrients. And we put them on this formula for 12 months. We assessed them 5 times. We did the neurocognitive assessments at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then unfortunately, because our budget was limited, we could only draw blood at baseline in 12 months. But we assessed them with what is called the ADAS-Cog, which is considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, especially people with dementia of any type. At 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive functioning in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. Guys, that's unheard of. Compare that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh.
The 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia, any kind of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, red light therapy, sound therapy. I mean, really, whatever the other type of intervention you could come up with, nothing else has showed that. And that's why I mentioned, at that moment, I was on cloud 9. I just thought, man, this is an incredible discovery.
That is,
if you guys have had any family members with this disease, you know how terrible it is, or if you've known anybody else, or I'm sure some of our listeners have had firsthand experiences with it. It's the 6th leading killer of Americans now. It's costing us somewhere between $500 billion in direct and indirect care costs. It's the leading cause of institutionalization in the elderly. I mean, I could go on and on with all these really sad statistics, but guys, there's nothing else. I mean, we published that first paper in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2013. In fact, in my entire career, I'm now somewhere around 190 peer-reviewed articles, I think. I don't even know what the number is exactly, but the only time in my career I actually had the journal of an editor call me up. We submitted that paper for review, and in about 30 days, I got a call from the editor, and he was like, "Wow, Dr. Lewis, this paper's incredible. As soon as I get the reviews back from the reviewers, I'm going to publish it." Like, that never happens. I mean, that's a unicorn, and made me feel
congratulations, really.
Thank you. It made me feel really good because, again, I was so excited. And we were getting, actually, as we were running the study, it took us about, as you can imagine, because the intervention was 12 months long, it took us about 2.5 years. We enrolled 34 people in the study. And oh, by the way, I didn't even mention that through a lecture that Dr. McDaniel gave, he had a lady in the audience listening to him talk about some of his anecdotal successes with people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And she and her husband eventually formed a relationship with him, and they had some money. They had 4 family members die of Alzheimer's, and they said, "Wow, what you're doing with these polysaccharides is very exciting. We'd like to make a donation to research if you will promise to run a study in Alzheimer's." And so they gave us $200,000 to run this study, and we were able to run the sister study with multiple sclerosis with it. But I just want our listeners to know that even that, I wouldn't even be sitting here talking to you guys today if it wasn't for the generosity of this one family. Because again, as you saw with, my example of what Alzheimer's Association and NIH did, you can't even get money from places like that.
And you would think the Alzheimer's Association would have enough. How many people really are doing really important research like you are? I know there are a lot of people out there, scientists doing that, but there has to be an arm of the Alzheimer's organization to fund these smaller research projects.
But remember, Lori, like when Dr. Kay Shanahan was on and just talking about the American Heart Association, it sounds like an eerily similar scenario where they're I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but their intentions aren't as pure as you would think because of just the way that their popularity is just not what they're out for. It's just
it's pharmaceuticals.
Let me digress. Right.
I'm right there with both of you. I mean, if you want to take it a one step further, my thought is, again, besides this notion of nutrition not allowing it to be the same type of licensing opportunity as a drug or some sort of genetic therapy, take it one step further is, in reality, if there was no such thing as Alzheimer's disease, there would be no such thing as Alzheimer's Association or its need to pay all of these bureaucrats, big 6-figure salaries and have highfalutin titles and sitting around like they're important and doing things. I mean, just maybe you guys will think less of me when I tell you this little anecdote. But after that first paper was published, I actually got a call from the director of development for Alzheimer's Association for South Florida. She was having a fundraiser event. And, I guess they have people that they scroll through publications, because I have no idea how that lady found me. But anyway, I get a call one day from this lady, and I can't remember her name now. Again, this is over a decade. And she invited me to this fundraiser, and it was a very, very short fundraiser. It wasn't more than like 45 minutes, but they had 3 people speak. They had a local channel reporter. He was talking about his grandfather dying from the disease. They had another person that was involved in, I think it was a nurse maybe, and then they had a third person who had just recently been diagnosed. And it was painful to listen to that, to all of their
Oh, yeah.
it was heart-wrenching stuff. But they had this very, I mean, you could tell it was a Hollywood level production, like 3-minute video that they played, and it's beautiful, and it's showing you all these scenes and whatnot, and they're bragging about how they've been in existence, I think, for like 40 years. They've been around a long time, and they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I think back 10 years ago, it was something like 350, 400 million. And so, I'm listening to that, and they're bragging about it. And then it's dawning on me like, okay, well, what do you have to show for all that money you've raised? And that was kind of, my own self-talk as I was
That's
just
an excellent question. That is an excellent question.
I'm sitting there, and that's my self-talk. I'm going, what have you done with all this money? And so the event concludes, and this lady, she comes back up to me, and she goes, "Oh, Dr. Lewis, I'm just so glad you were here today. Well, tell me, what did you think of our event?" And I said, "You know what? I'm leaving this event very angry, because my colleagues and I showed more with less than $200,000 to actually help people with this horrible disease than you people have showed in 40 years, raising hundreds of millions of dollars."
Good for you. Yay.
And she looked at me like I had just, smacked her in the face. And I just said, I'm sorry, this is a joke. You're going around with your hand out all the time, raising all this money, and you have nothing to show to actually help people improve their quality of life.
Except the annual races in every state.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it.
That I can, yeah.
So I just, between that silly event and then getting rejected by NIH and that organization to extend the data. And for those listeners who don't know, the scientific process is very much dependent. I want everybody to understand, you're a professor at a university. That's not the ivory tower. As much as people like to believe it is, it's not. It's as dog eat dog as any corporation in the world. You literally are fighting and scraping and scrapping for every single penny you can get, not just to do research, but to pay your own salary, to pay for your space, the bills of the utilities, your staff, your lab equipment. I mean, literally everything. It's not like the university just cuts you a big check and says, "Here, John, here's $2 million. Now do great science and make us all proud." No, you literally are running your own little business. So I that's another pet peeve of mine, that people think, "Oh, you're a professor. You're sitting around in your houndstooth hat, and you're acting like you're a big important guy making quotes that New York Times will refer to." No, again, you're working your butt off just to stay afloat, especially for somebody like me that was in this alternative world, which really should be foundational, not alternative. But that's another conversation. But anyway, I wanted to share that anecdote, because I think it's important that a lot of times people outside of academics tend to have a very different opinion or view of what really goes on there. And so again, this being in academics, in my position, if you're teaching undergrad students all day, that's a whole different position. You are getting a salary from the university. You're expected to, teach your students, supervise them, do all that stuff. And that's a whole different position. But the kind of professor that I literally had to raise money all the time. And it was just a very hard road to pursue for nearly 20 years. And so between getting rejected and seeing what truly was the emperor without any clothes on. Plus, just, again, I questioned very significantly how many more years of my life can I work at this kind of a pace under this much stress and pressure without, just finally just losing it. I mean, really, like, and I'm not trying to sound flippant or, like I'm being funny. I mean, that was really true. I mean, I would go to bed some nights thinking, oh my God, I only have a couple of more months on this budget. Where am I going to pay 25% of my salary? Like, I had those kinds of nights sometimes. And so it's not an easy place to be. And I tell students all the time, I still occasionally will give a guest lecture for some of my friends at the university. And I tell them very point blank, not trying to scare people, but just saying, if you are thinking about research at this point in your life, man, you better be willing to it's like being a professional athlete. It's not going to a bank at 9, with all due respect to the bankers, it's not going to the bank at 9 a.m., leaving at 4:30, and then you can just forget it for the rest of the evening and go home and eat your dinner and spend time with your spouse and your kids and do whatever. No, man, this is like an 80 hour a week proposition. You're working your butt off 6, 7 days a week, because it takes that to even get anywhere remotely close to ahead, if you will, quote unquote. And that was me, again, in a very conventional place with no real institutional support for the type of nutrition research I was conducting. So I think it's important for people, especially undergrad students, to understand how difficult it can be if you're not going down the road of pharmacology or genetics. It's a whole different animal in the nutrition and supplements and exercise world. So, but anyway, I'm sorry for being maybe overly political on this topic. I just think sometimes it's important for people to understand. But the other interesting findings that we got from that first paper were that, supporting the cognitive function findings, we showed improvements in overall immune system functioning according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's. So our CD4s are our helper cells, our CD8s are our cytotoxic cells, and it's important to keep that ratio in balance as we age. And then we showed reductions in TNF alpha and VEGF, which are markers of inflammation. We all know chronic inflammation is very related to basically every disease today. You can't really talk about any disease without acknowledging the chronic inflammation role. And I'm not talking about the acute inflammation, because obviously they're very different. But our paper was probably the first showing that finding in people with Alzheimer's. TNF alpha and VEGF are commonly classically looked at in heart disease and cancer. We showed just under a 300% improvement in CD14 cells, which are a marker of adult stem cells. And so, remembering that these people were on average 79.9 years of age, and we showed just under a 300% increase or improvement in their adult stem cell production process, man, that was just, for us, that was
incredible.
Beautiful finding.
Yeah.
And there's another paper that was published in JAMA, actually, a year or two before our paper, showing that CD14 cells can become neurons. So for us, that was a very important finding, because we were wondering, besides the fact of lowering inflammation, improving overall immune function, how do you explain these people, as we refer to it sometimes as coming back from the ether? Like, how do you explain a person who's had dementia for, several years, not remembering his spouse, his wife, his kids, his wedding, his career, literally very little of the person left, and yet started to remember those things? How do you explain that? And so the only thing that made sense to us was really the neuroplasticity effect that was involved with these CD14 cells, which again is very inherently linked to the body's ability through its own intelligence to be able to say, okay, the brain's damaged. Now I've got stem cells being produced again. Those stem cells are going to go to the brain, create new neurons, and allow this person to come back a bit. And so, I mean, again, we just had findings that are, and still to this date, I mean, there's been no paper prior to that first one and no paper since our paper that has shown what we've shown. Now, I know that Dean Ornish's group just recently, he was all over CNN a couple of weeks ago for his lifestyle intervention that I know he's gotten very famous for. And he was looking at people in mild cognitive impairment and showing that there could be tremendous benefit for lifestyle intervention. And I applaud the work that he's done, but in no way does our stuff really compare to his, because we only gave these people a dietary supplement. Now think about this for a minute. We didn't change their medication. We didn't change their diet. We didn't change their physical activity. We didn't change their socialization. Literally no other variable in their daily routine changed. And we asked them, please don't, during this 12-month period, unless it's an emergency situation, just keep your meds, stable. Try not to make too many adjustments in your meds. And so we didn't do anything but introduce this dietary supplement into their daily routine. And you can imagine, especially if you've been personally affected by this disease, that these caregivers of people with Alzheimer's are the most motivated people on earth. They are so desperate and so committed to trying to find something to help their loved one that they will literally bend over backward to try anything. In fact, we had Dr. Reg and I, we wanted to make sure that we studied very sick people. We weren't interested in mild cognitive impairment, newly diagnosed people, or even people with mild dementia. We wanted the really sick folks because, again, they're basically nothing for those people. The caregivers are very motivated to find something, and then Big Pharma doesn't study those people anyway. Big Pharma looks at those people at that level of severity as basically a lost cause. So there were a lot of reasons we chose to study this particular group. And again, our findings were we were very optimistic based on what he had already shown in some anecdotal cases, but the clinical trial just turned out to be beyond our expectations. We published 2 more papers from that study related to brain-derived neurotropic factor, which were not quite as exciting. We showed a 12% increase in BDNF over the 12-month period. It was not statistically significant. It was probably due to a small sample size. But we had those 2 papers, and then we published a 4th paper actually just this past year. Even though I'm not in academics anymore, I still have my hand a bit in peer-reviewed publishing, but we showed a really nice effect of the balance between the Th1 and the Th2 components of the immune system, which generally speaking are your pro to your anti-inflammatory components. And they changed over the course of the 12-month period, and then they were correlated as they rebalanced. These folks were very Th1 dominant, and then as they rebalanced, not to unity by any stretch of the imagination, but at least let's call it not so Th1 dominant, that rebalancing was related to improved cognitive function. So that was another beautiful paper that we just published actually it was last December. It's coming up on a year now. But so those were 4 papers we published from the Alzheimer's study. And then in our sister paper in MS, it was very similar as well in terms of just the level of exciting findings. As people know, and people with MS don't have the same level of cognitive difficulty as people with Alzheimer's do, but they have, very much a more of a, let's call it a physical functioning / quality of life effect. And so one of the things I learned in running this study was that people with MS typically do not die of demyelination. They actually die of infection. That's the leading cause of mortality in people with MS. I didn't know that prior to running the study. And they went on average, this is hard to believe, but they had 7.9 infections on average at baseline. And after 12 months on our formula, it was all the way down to 2.5. So that was just, again, a very beautiful finding for us. And it really was consistent with a lot of the other research that's been published out there about how these polysaccharides are so anti-infectious. So not only do they modulate your immune system, they lower inflammation, they turn on adult stem cells, they rebalance components of the immune system, but they also, if you're dealing with a bacteria or a virus or a fungus, some other type of pathogen, they will help you combat that because they really function like signaling mechanisms for the immune system, especially the natural killer cells and the dendritic cells. And then we also showed with the FAMS, which is the gold standard, the functional assessment for people with MS, it's the gold standard for people with MS. We showed almost all subscale on that measure was statistically significantly improved across the 12 months. We showed an increase in EGF. That's a protein that's related to remyelination. So that was a very important finding. We showed an improvement in the FAST gene, the FAS gene. It's kind of like an overall global marker of immune function as well, kind of like the CD4 to CD8 ratio, but it looks at it from the genetic side. And then there were all other, several other quality of life measures that we looked at that were also statistically significantly improved over the course of the 12 months. So then we published 3 papers from that study. So we've got 7 papers combined from these 2 clinical trials that we've published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature that really formed the basis for me leaving academics and moving on into business and nutrition and doing what I'm doing with what, what work that I do now. But I don't, the other thing I'd like to just tell you guys is I don't mean to sound bitter in anything that I've mentioned so far. It's just that I have a very emotional attachment to what I've done and where I've been, because I'm so, my position in life, if you will, my path in life, my personal and professional interests are so intertwined that I can't help but be a bit emotional about, what I went through. But I'm not bitter about it, because I met incredible people that helped me get to where I am today. And if I had never taken that journey, I wouldn't be able to appreciate all the things that I've been able to accomplish. And then more importantly, the amount of people and the number of people that I've been able to help. So I'm not bitter about that. It's just, you have to be very resilient. And I do consider myself to be a pretty resilient person to be able to get through a lot of those pitfalls, hurdles, punches in the gut, whatever you want to call them. So I thought it was important to mention that too, just to kind of end that little story on a positive note and make sure that people don't think I'm running around the world angry and bitter and upset at the world. I'm not, but it's important to share that with you in the proper context.
No, thanks for saying that as well. I'm curious too, because I definitely am one of those sugar guys. One of the things that I've always think as far as when I'm ever helping people out is to avoid the sugar. But one of the things that I think that you're highlighting is these aren't ordinary sugars, obviously, and I'm guessing that they're not readily available in our food supply at all.
That's right.
So how do
That's
we?
exactly right.
Yeah, how do we get these into our system? Obviously, you don't have a supplement that satisfies that, but overall, what are the polysaccharides that we may be able to get just going to the supermarket?
Well, that's a great question. So basically any vegetable, not so much fruit, but excuse me, certainly any vegetable, a lot of grains, mushrooms, seaweed, these kinds of foods. If you're just shopping, in the grocery store in the produce section, you'll get some polysaccharide content in some of those different foods. However, the difference is let's take the 2 that I've studied. So aloe vera, I mean, clearly most people, if you ask them about aloe vera, their first thought is, oh, it's great for you get a sunburn or a cut or a wound, something topical. Most people don't even understand why it does what it does anyway topically. And then how does that relate to our research? Well, number one, the gel in the aloe vera leaf is 99% water. So I'm not saying using your aloe vera gel on a sunburn is a bad thing. Keep doing that. That's fine. But it's a very limited way of getting the benefit from this incredible plant. So you strip all of that water out first. So now you've got these other compounds. It's not just polysaccharides. I mean, literally, aloe vera has just about every nutrient you can think of. It's just that they're in very small amounts. But we concentrate that polysaccharide into a powder that now has therapeutic and physiological potential, meaning that it can benefit you by taking a few hundred milligrams or even a gram or 2, depending on your status and what's going on with you to derive benefit from that. And then on the rice bran side, unfortunately, about 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. And so the white rice is the last big layer or component. It's that big white endosperm that is white rice that people eat. And so if you're not eating brown rice, the brown is where the rice bran gives the distinction between the 2. I would argue that even if you are eating brown rice every day, I don't know if I eat it every day. I eat brown rice pretty regularly, maybe not every day, maybe 5 days a week, but you're still probably not getting enough, again, concentrated material to have a therapeutic or physiological benefit. So this is where, again, you take the rice bran and you concentrate it into a powder where for a few hundred milligrams, a gram or two, and then you put these two together, that's really where now you're talking about ramping up the potential for benefit. But yes, I mean, absolutely, we get different polysaccharides from lots of plants. It's just these other polysaccharides, there is a uniqueness, a special quality, if you will, about the ones that particularly come from aloe vera and rice bran. And unfortunately, no one eats aloe vera that I'm aware of. At least, again, if you are, you're probably just sucking down the gel, and you'd have to drink gallons of that stuff to get any polysaccharide content. And then again, most of the world is eating white rice, so they're not even getting any rice bran from eating white rice anyway. So you really need a supplement to benefit from these two particular polysaccharides based on, again, not my own opinion, but all the research that we've conducted.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think
Yeah.
just to wrap at this point, I would think that we probably want to see, because again, you did mention inflammation. It's obviously has a lot of therapeutic effects. What do you think is the way that these supplements and incorporating polysaccharides into your diet will help with weight management?
Well, you just hit it, right? I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Inflammation is tied to everything, especially overweight and obesity. And so helping folks with a weight problem and getting that inflammation under control. And again, we're referring to the chronic type, not the acute type that you sorely need if you've been in trauma or you're dealing with an infection. We want the body to be inflamed then, because that's part of the healing process. It's where it becomes, after that acute event is over and then it's dysregulated, that's the chronic problem. But I think the interesting thing about these polysaccharides is that you hear sometimes, especially in homeopathy, things referred to as adaptogenic, meaning that the body has an ability or an intelligence to, you take something or you put something into it, and then it can somehow balance whether it needs to upregulate or downregulate something. And so these polysaccharides are so, again, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but there's just something very unique and dynamic about these two particular ones from aloe vera and rice bran. And my working theory is that this is actually beyond biochemistry. I think there's something about the resonant frequency, and I hope to be able to study more about this as I continue going down my journey to prove my theory. But I think that with somebody who's overweight and they're dealing with all of this inflammation, to help them calm down that inflammation is so, so important. And these polysaccharides, I mean, maybe curcumin is the only other thing that I think Mother Nature provides to us that is, somewhat on the same level in terms of effectiveness. But anything else that, at least in terms of my own review of the literature, and we've actually written, my colleagues and I, we wrote a review paper last year or 2 years ago. We looked at 20, I think it was 23 or 24 different nutrients on their effects on inflammation and immune function. And again, the polysaccharides just stand out. I mean, even compared to something like vitamin D, which obviously is very important too, but really the polysaccharides are just on another level. So when you combine, or when you add into, modifying the diet, going hypocaloric and trying to increase physical activity and stress management and dealing with food addiction, all these things, adding the polysaccharides into somebody who's trying to get back to a normal weight, to me, is very important. And then the other thing that I didn't mention before, but I think I would like to tell people as well, is that don't just look at the immune system as your first line of defense against infection or invasion. That's absolutely true, but the immune system is much more elegant and beautiful than that. And I like to use the analogy of a symphony orchestra. You have the conductor who's keeping all the different sections of the symphony playing together. That's exactly the perfect simple analogy for the immune system. The immune system is like the conductor to the entire body, where it communicates with all the other major organ systems. And so when you think of somebody who's got a weight loss problem, if they have a dysregulated immune system, they cannot possibly expect to have a very well-functioning endocrine system, which is obviously very related to the weight story. So it's so important to have the immune system modulated, functioning properly, surveillant, being able to orchestrate all these different pathways with every other major organ system. And so, again, that's kind of like your, your double-barrel shotgun, if you will, of helping people with weight loss. It's dealing with that inflammation on one side, that chronic inflammation, and then it's helping to regulate the immune system on the other side of that barrel to then help all the other organ systems to get back to balance and back to proper status to function properly to help that person lose weight.
No, thank you for putting that all together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. We're the first person to have on who really touched the subject about polysaccharides, so I really appreciate you doing that. And I want to give you an opportunity to just tell the audience where to get more information about you, including your website, your social media handles, anywhere where you can keep up with all these great research papers that you're doing, and just keep us abreast of all the good stuff you're up to.
Thank you, Omar. The best site for what I would refer to as comprehensive information is drlewisnutrition.com. That's the name of the company that I started after leaving academics, although it's not the first name, it's actually the fourth. I've gone through a few iterations of being in business, which has been no bowl of cherries either. But go to drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr. no period Lewis Lewis nutrition.com, and then you can find us on all of those, popular social media channels right now under the same handle, Dr. Lewis Nutrition. Our flagship product from all of that research that I mentioned on Alzheimer's and MS is called Daily Brain Care. And, I'm happy if anybody wants to come to our site. We've got email address, phone number. I'm very easily contactable if anybody has any questions about the research, the products, their own situation, if they think they maybe didn't hear something they hope they would have heard on our interview today, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. But I'm basically in the dietary supplement business at this point because as I mentioned, I just got so burned out of the academic process and trying to run research, but I'm still a researcher at heart. So Daily Brain Care is a part of my life. I've been taking this product for over 10 years. I've had my mother on it. Mom's been on it for, I think, 12, 13. My wife started taking it about 5 years ago. Our daughter turned 4 this year. When she turned 6 months old, we started introducing solid foods in her diet. I put her on it. So, I'd be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I'd been talking to you guys about all this work that I do and have done, and then I'm not even, taking my own formula. So for me, like, this is just as important. This is so important to my routine. And this is not without, this is with no hyperbole, basically. I mean, I literally feel like these polysaccharides are just as important to me as anything else that I do every day, whether it's my diet or my exercise or some of the other supplements I take or getting proper sleep and rest. I mean, all these things. I just feel like for me, this, taking these polysaccharides is like one of my best tools in my toolbox to help keep me optimally healthy and prevent, who wants to end up with Alzheimer's or cancer or diabetes or heart disease or all these other things that are killing us? Who wants to end up with that? I mean, that to me prevention is just as important as treatment, if not more important. So, gosh, I mean, look at these things as, you're one of your very important tools in your toolbox to keep you optimally healthy and functioning well every day.
That is excellent. Yep. Same here. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, for stopping by and educating us and helping the world get healthier.
Thank you guys for having me. I mean, it's been a real pleasure. If you guys ever want me back on your show again, I can talk about other things in nutrition or exercise as well. But as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about polysaccharides and spreading that message. So anything that I can help you guys with, I'm happy to do that. So I'm grateful and very appreciative of the opportunity to be here today with you guys and your listeners.
Yeah, appreciate having you as well, Doc. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of This Podcast Burns Fat. We're so excited to have you as a listener, and we're hoping that you really enjoyed the content as well. And if you did, please run over to iTunes and provide a rating and or review. It will go a long way in helping us continuously build our listenership up so that we can provide you with excellent content regarding fat loss, weight management, and just an overall healthy lifestyle. Thanks so much. Have a great night.